What if the messages you're waiting for have been there all along? And what if they arrive in the ordinary moments you almost miss? Hey, so welcome back to Women on the Brink. So I've been thinking a lot lately about messages, and that's mainly because I haven't been getting too many, or maybe I just haven't been paying, close enough attention. But if you've been listening over the last couple of episodes, you'll know we've been exploring what anthropology has taught me, not just as an academic discipline, but as a way of seeing the world. And we talked about Indinawemaaganidog, the Anishinaabe teaching that all beings are our relatives. And we talked about Ubuntu, the idea that I am because we are. And, those aren't just beautiful philosophies, they're actually invitations. They're invitations to notice and to remember that every interaction, whether it's with another person or another living being, is part of a much bigger web of relationships. And for a long time, I used to feel like messages from beyond came fairly regularly to me, sometimes through dreams, sometimes through strange coincidences, and sometimes through people who seemed to appear at exactly the right moment. It's been a while since anything like that has happened. And then the other day, I was talking with a nurse practitioner who deals with death and the dying. And she told me of a couple of really, really lovely stories about her experience with messages and how they came through children who were able to communicate with the other side in a hospice. And she told me also of her own experience with her mother communicating with her after her mother had passed. So it inspired me to share this little story of my own. So the other day I went for a run along the seawall, and as I started out, I noticed a small figure sitting on the curb by the lagoon, and it's completely forested in that area. From a distance, I couldn't really tell if it was a woman or a child. They had a hoodie pulled up over their head and their face was buried in their hands, and they were completely still. And as I got closer, I slowed down and I asked, "Hey, are you okay?" And there was no response. So I decided to reframe the question. I said, "Is there anything that you need?" And the person turned to me very quietly and said, "No." So I kind of looked around. There wasn't anybody else nearby. And I just stood there for a moment wondering, should I press further? But something told me that respecting their answer was also important. So I wished them well and I went on my way and just continued my run. Then a little further down the seawall, I saw this flock of Canadian geese, maybe 30 of them spread across the bike path, and they had their goslings with them. And just then, this group of cyclists came barreling toward them without slowing down, and it kind of forced them all to scatter in all these directions. And before I even realized I was speaking, I heard myself yell, "Slow down, have some respect." It wasn't planned. It was almost like instinct just took over. And, one cyclist slowed down. Another one actually got off her bike and looked at me and she kind of smiled and said, "They're scared, aren't they?" And I said, "They have their young with them. I mean, we share this park with the animals. It's important to give them some space." So we exchanged smiles and I kept running. And about 5 minutes later, another cyclist, an older gentleman, pulled over beside me and he said, "Can you help me with some directions?" And so I pointed to where he needed to go. And as he prepared to leave, he looked at me for a moment and he said, "Do you know you're a saint? Has anyone told you that today?" And I just, I laughed. I thought, "Phew, there's a lot of things I could be. A saint is definitely not one of them." And we shook hands and he rode off in one direction and I continued in the other. And for a few kilometers after that, I just couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. And it wasn't because I didn't necessarily believe it, but because of the timing. 3 small encounters, a quiet check-in with someone who seemed to be struggling, a spontaneous defense of a family of geese simply trying to exist, and then an unexpected stranger who stopped long enough to offer words I never would have chosen for myself. Maybe it's all a coincidence, or maybe that's the point. Humans are meaning-making creatures, right? Across cultures, people have always searched for messages, not because we want certainty, but because they understood that meaning often emerges through our relationships. Indinawemaaganidog reminds us that every living being is our relative, and Ubuntu reminds us that our humanity is revealed through how we meet and interact with one another. Neither teaching asks us to perform grand acts of heroism. They just ask us to pay attention, to notice the person sitting alone, to notice the frightened geese, to notice the stranger who appears with unexpected words. And whether that older man was simply being kind or whether he was, I don't know, in some mysterious way, a messenger from the creator, I honestly don't know. And maybe it doesn't even matter. But perhaps the real message wasn't that I was a saint. It was simply this: keep noticing, keep caring, keep remembering that every encounter is an opportunity to honor our relationship with one another and with all our relations. Sometimes the creator doesn't speak through thunder. Sometimes he arrives on a bicycle.